Yes, thank you for inviting me. And obviously, everything that I'm going to be talking about is pure, unadulterated speculation. And so I've said to others, if after 10,000 years, none of this turns out to be true, then you can all have your money back for this presentation. Okay, a little bit of a side, which I forgot to mention in the text, but this is actually most of the design of the slides in this being done using PowerPoint's artificial intelligence, which I know that there will be two of you there will be screaming about later. But hey, I figured we're talking about the future. Let's use artificial intelligence to lay out the slides. So we have a crazy hobby. We collect rocks and we talk about them endlessly to our friends. Some of us even spend money on new rocks, which some people think is a bit strange when you can go out and find rocks outside everywhere for free. But we know our rocks are special rocks. They mean a lot to us, and maybe they'll last longer than we will. What will happen to our rocks? What will happen to the hobby itself over the next 10 years, the next 100 years, the next 10,000 years and more? We can't talk about the future of mineral collecting without a brief look at what mineral collecting is like now and how we got there. Humans have been collecting stones for a very long time. In fact, since long before they were even human, if that makes any sense. These stone tool fragments were unearthed in the last decade from the shores of Lake Turkana in Kenya. They date to 3.3 million years ago, which is over 700,000 years before the second oldest known tools and predating the earliest humans in the Homo genus. It's believed these stones were collected and used by a more ancient species such as Australopithecus or Kenyanthropus. Here's an illustration of Australopithecus, illustrated in the typical "I'm off to go get me some more stones" pose that we all know so well. But this was collecting rocks as a tool. There was, as far as we know, no interest in their aesthetics or curiosity as what they were or how they formed. We can never know what our distant ancestors thought, but it's likely during their relatively short lives, their thoughts are very much concentrated on survival. So fast forward to Homo sapiens, who are a much larger brain capacity. These calcite cleavages are possibly the oldest mineral collection known. They date to 105,000 years ago and from the Kalahari of southern Africa. These crystals are found in a cave a couple of kilometers away from the outcrop they were probably collected from. Now, they served no practical purpose at the time. They're too soft to use as tools. So the reasoning is that someone picked them up and kept them simply because they liked them. Maybe it was a child's collection, the first young mineral collector maybe. Although life expectancy in those days was pretty short, so they probably would have all qualified for YMC membership. Let's fast forward a bit because we don't want to spend the entire time talking about the past. Mineral collecting as we know it today really started in the 18th century, and it took off properly in the 19th century. Back then, it was the hobby of kings, queens, and others born to wealth. If you think minerals are expensive now, you don't know how lucky you are. The golden age of mining had started, and with the birth of modern mineralogical research, the first true systematic collections developed, many of which became the nucleus of the most important academic and museum collections that exist today. The first mineral dealers made their fortunes buying rocks from miners and selling them to wealthy collectors at highly inflated prices. Nothing like that happens today, of course. Mineral specimens were still almost exclusively byproducts from metal or gemstone mining, or from the occasional pioneering geological expedition. Now, the collecting we've been talking about so far is primarily old world collecting. During the 19th century, the New World was far too concerned with stealing land from the natives and then having a big war of itself to spend too much time thinking about minerals. The 20th century changed everything. In the 20th century, we've figured out how to get around from place to place without taking days and or smelling of horse. Now it's the New World's turn to get interested in mineral collecting, and it's the Old World's turn to have a big war or two. The car revolutionizes transport, and with the creation of the road network in the United States, normal people can go out and do things they never did before. Magazines and guidebooks sprung up, offering people the chance to go out and explore the desert for minerals. If you were lucky, you might even get a chance to loot some Native American artifacts too. In 1926, Peter Zodak launched his Rocks and Minerals magazine, which of course is still going strong today. We're nearly at the fun future stuff, I promise. The 20th century also brought along the first serious commercial digging for mineral specimens for collectors. Dealers would lease property and work it to sell the minerals. Mail order minerals and mineral shows became popular. Mineral clubs were founded. Workers' rights improved, workers had more free time, and more people started having disposable income. The economy is improving finally, but Europe has gone to war again. Oh wait, now the United States has gone to war too. The war is over. In the United States, there was a desperate rush for some reason to find all the uranium and find it quickly. So the US government encourages prospectors to go out in the desert to look for it. Many of them don't find uranium, but find other interesting minerals that someone might want to buy. Also, the US military built an enormous number of off-road vehicles during the war that it no longer needs, so it's selling them off to the public at cheap prices. There has never been a better time to go off into the desert and look for rocks. And so begins what many call the golden age of mineral collecting. Experienced collectors and amateurs all have the opportunity to explore relatively fresh sites, abandoned mines, and to buy or barter minerals from miners in the big remaining mines, such as Bisbee. The hobby becomes more and more popular. The Tucson show starts. The 1950s to 1980s is generally regarded by many as the point where good mineral specimens, at least for the US classics, were the most affordable. Supply was good, demand was growing, and the hobby thrived. Fast forward again. It's today, it's the 21st century, and what's changed? Mineral dealing has gone online. Mineral dealers and collectors are truly globalist in operation. A specimen mine in Pakistan can be with a collector in the US in a couple of weeks, and in some cases only going through one other set of hands between the mine who dug it and the collector who bought it. The internet allows opportunities for collectors to learn and have access to information on minerals and their occurrences far beyond what previous generations had available to them. I think there's a website that does all that. Travel is, or at least was, much easier than before, and there are more mining operations worldwide dedicated to collecting mineral specimen production than at any other time in the past. But not everything is as easy as it was. Regulations have increased, making it more and more difficult for amateur collectors to go out in the field to collect. Many sites are off limits, either in national parks or dedicated to sites of special scientific interest. Many sites are privately owned, and maybe in the past that have let collectors in, but now, due to liability issues, they're increasingly unwilling to do so. And many localities, maybe even most, have simply been exhausted. Everything good that was to be found there has already been taken out. Almost all localities have a finite lifespan, and the golden period of collecting worked out a huge number of them. Mining practices have changed. Greater automation has led to far fewer opportunities for miners to save specimens during mine production. Although there are still cases where dealers and mining companies are working together to save very important finds, because a handful of very good mineral specimens could be worth a lot more than a ton of copper ore. There is one new opportunity for mining, and that's mining the riches of older collections. The post-war generation that built up their collections during the golden years are now dropping dead like flies, and the dealers swoop in to buy up all the shiny rocks and the grieving relatives as fast as they can. And so the cycle continues. While we aren't in the golden age now, the majority of those minerals are still circulating around. The digital economy, which has been slowly taking over since the introduction of big microcomputers in the 1980s and the internet in the 1990s, has now taken over everything. Only one of the companies in the top 5 largest companies in the world by market capitalization is not part of the digital economy, and that's the Saudi Arabian oil company Aramco. And I imagine within 10 years we'll see that one drop out the list. Compared with 40 years ago, young people today have to spend considerably more of their income on housing, and average homes are getting smaller as the worldwide population increases. I won't get into talking about the growth of wealth inequity in society, but that, of course, is a huge problem, unless you're in the 1%, of course. Smaller houses mean less space available for a mineral collection, which for the field collector can be a terrible thing, because all us field collectors bring back 20 times more than we actually need every trip. But for those of you building up a collection in the traditional way of buying shiny rocks from salespeople, you have learned how to adapt to the reduction in collection space in the most effective ways. You're building smaller collections, but focusing on quality. You're buying and displaying smaller specimens than your grandparents have chosen, but you have learned to share your collections online to a potential audience of millions. Finally, let's talk about where we go from here. What is going to happen to our hobby in the coming years, decades, and centuries? What will happen to our collections? Come with me on an entirely speculative journey with no guarantees of accuracy. Firstly, I'm going to make one bold assumption, and that is that somehow humanity manages to avoid becoming extinct in the next 10,000 years through asteroid collision, disease, or our own damned stupidity. And this is far from certain, but let's be positive. What's going to change in the next 10 years? We're already seeing the changes now. We're stuck in the middle of a rapid transformation of society that's no less dramatic than the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century. But this time, to badly quote Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution will be digitized. And if you think the changes have been dramatic so far, you ain't seen nothing yet. Artificial intelligence and automation are changing almost every job. Traditional jobs will be decimated as the digital economy takes over and replaces traditional roles one by one. Today's supermarket cashiers are in a dying job role. Within the next 10 years, we'll see the start of the end of taxi drivers, most retail staff, telemarketers, bank tellers, many manufacturing work positions, and, of course, petroleum exploration geologists. Fortunately, the digital economy is opening up a whole range of new job opportunities, although it's unlikely that most of these people made redundant as part of this change will be able to retrain effectively to become cybersecurity consultants. This inevitable change in society has been unexpectedly accelerated by one small thing. Coronavirus has brought forward societal change in ways no one could have properly predicted, and in general, this is the one good thing to come out of this pandemic. For thousands of years, the big cities have been the central hub for major commerce. Companies set up their headquarters in cities because it's what they were expected to do. How many mining companies have their headquarters in London or Toronto? Answer, quite a lot. How many mines are there in and around London or Toronto? Answer, none. What happened when mining companies sent their head office staff to work from home? Did the company collapse? No, it didn't. Are the staff happy they don't have to do the daily commute? Yes, in general. Are the mining companies wondering whether their expensive offices in London are worth the cost? They surely are. We're already seeing a significant shift with both individuals and companies moving out of cities. With a better digital infrastructure, any company that relies primarily on internet connectivity to do business can set up their offices anywhere there's a reliable net connection. This means one thing: the shift of population from rural areas to the cities that has been the dominant force for the last few hundred years is reversing. We won't ever see the big cities deserted, but the population sizes are likely to stabilize, or at least rise at a far lower level than the rest of the country. What does this mean for collectors? Well, it means quite a lot. Collectors will be able to move to places where they could potentially get a larger place with more room for rocks. You could finally move somewhere that's within day trip range of collecting localities. You may even have more disposable income to spend on minerals, all thanks to coronavirus. Now, as with any sweeping generalization, these comments are both general and sweeping and don't apply to everyone. Most of you won't be so flexible that you can move anywhere you want to. You still have jobs to do, rent or mortgages to pay, and an expensive rock addiction to consider. But more of you can make the move than ever before. Okay, let's get back to minerals. How do these changes impact on collecting? First, let's talk about mineral dealers. I don't want to talk about mineral dealers. Well, there are three types of dealers: those who sell online, those who don't sell online because they only have ultra high-end minerals and they deal directly with a small set of high-end customers, and those who don't sell online because they don't know how to or are afraid to do it. One of these groups isn't going to last the next 10 years. Mineral shows are going to have a very tough time, and it will be the club shows that suffer the most. We've had 2 years of show disruption thanks to COVID, and many smaller shows are going to struggle to be able to exist after this. We've already seen the end of the club show in Denver, and sadly, I predict many of our favorite mineral shows won't be around in 10 years' time. In Tucson, the dynamic is changing away from mineral shows, with major dealers all heavily investing in their own units that could potentially be operated all year round. The Mineral City Complex, the La Fuente building, and the new Fine Mineral building on the corner of St. Mary's and Granada are all part of this. If you're a major mineral dealer or want to be, and don't yet have your building in Tucson, you better start looking soon because they're all being snapped up right now. The shows catering to the wholesale buyer are unlikely to be significantly affected by these changes, but the mineral shows that have historically been dedicated to mineral collectors, whether at the conference center or a hotel, are going into a steep decline over the next 10 years. Smaller club shows, where most of the tables are taken by collectors who do some mineral dealing as a side hustle to earn money for more rocks or simply to declutter their houses, will probably be fine. We will hear a lot of people, myself included, complaining bitterly that the Tucson of the late 2020s isn't anything like the Tucson of the 2010s and before. But we'll keep going, and maybe with a little help and support from the community, we'll at least see the TGMS show survive and grow, because Tucson certainly won't ever be the same without that. So things are going to get easier for people who sell online. Well, yes, and also a big fat no. We have better internet, we have better cameras, especially those in cell phones that make it a much easier task to show a specimen online than before. We're seeing a drift away from more professional Scoville-style photography for online sales towards video clips. Turning a specimen around in the hand is almost always giving a better impression online of what you are offering for sale than any number of still photos. And it's a lot simpler to do. Mineral photography isn't going to go away, but in 10 years' time, it will be exceedingly rare to see any specimen offered for sale online with just photos and no video clip. We'll also see within 10 years significant improvements to photogrammetry, where you use a camera or cell phone to make a 3D scan of an object to turn it into a 3D model that can be displayed on a computer. In 10 years' time, it will be quite commonplace to see dealers using this technology to display mineral specimens as rotating virtual objects on screen. Right now, the technology really doesn't work well with translucent or transparent minerals, or with anything with shiny mirror-like surfaces, so that's most minerals. But this will be overcome in the next 10 years. We've had 20 years of incredible growth of online business, leading countless thousands of traditional businesses collapsed in their way. Governments worldwide have noticed one important thing. They have been losing out on tax revenue from the countless small international transactions carried out online. Traditionally, if you ordered a mineral specimen from a vendor overseas, it would be your responsibility to pay any import duties and sales taxes on import, and it would frequently come in a box that was often marked as a gift or no commercial value, so you don't need to pay anything. That's going to be almost impossible within the next 10 years, as more and more countries move to a system that forces the seller to collect sales tax for the territory you're shipping the specimen to. So if you're in the UK and you sell a mineral to a customer in Bulgaria, you have to work out the total price, including Bulgarian sales tax, charge your customer the full price, including tax, and then do regular tax returns to Bulgaria to send them the tax owed, even if you only have a single sale to Bulgaria during that time. Now imagine having to do the same paperwork of tax collection for every other territory worldwide. The internet was once seen as the great leveler. It allowed businesses selling online from home the ability to compete with large multinational companies if you had the right products, price, and marketing. That age is coming to an end, and the major online marketplaces such as Amazon, eBay, Etsy, etc., are going to utterly dominate international e-commerce over the next decade. It's going to be very hard for any mineral dealer to be able to sell internationally without using a shopping gateway such as eBay or Amazon to handle the payment processing, tax collection, and management. The alternative is going to be, as many small e-commerce sites are already doing, limiting international sales to only a small number of countries where you know the business you generate will be worth the administration time and costs. Let's talk about the availability of minerals in 10 years' time. The good news is that we're going to see more and more commercial specimen mining operations coming online over the next 10 years. The bad news is it's going to become harder and harder to legally field collect minerals as an amateur. Mining companies are becoming more and more automated, making it difficult for mineral specimen rescue and active metal mines. But there is an opportunity for smart mining companies here. The high value of fine minerals makes them a possible lucrative secondary profit source if they can extract the minerals without disrupting the workflow of mining. Artificial intelligence systems may be better suited to helping this in the future, both in being better able to predict where potentially valuable mineral pockets might be, and possibly automating routing, digging, and drilling equipment to avoid such pockets while extracting normal ore so that the pockets can be removed later by specialists. What other changes would we like to see in the next 10 years for collectors? What about magazines? Will they survive? Mostly yes, I think. We may see one or two fold, but that happens from time to time anyway. I suspect the major magazines we know and love will still be here in 10 years' time. However, will people be buying them on paper or digitally? That's more tricky to predict. In general, print-only magazines are suffering, and online magazines are doing better every year, at least relative to their print editions. But online paid content has to compete with a huge amount of free online content. So your magazine has to be exceptional to do well with digital content. Okay, that's not a problem for the best of our magazines. But we also do have the collector instinct to consider too here. A PDF of a magazine isn't a tangible thing you can hold and admire. You can't put PDFs on your bookshelf. Paper is not as convenient as digital in most cases, of course, but of course we still have the problem of storage space to consider. So I'm expecting within 10 years, most subscribers to major minimal magazines will be opting to receive both digital and paper copies, but only because minimal magazines are one of the few magazines people would actually want to keep long term. How will technology evolve over the next 10 years? 10 years ago, we were only just getting used to smartphones. Now they are everywhere. It's the fastest widespread adoption of a technological improvement ever. What will we be doing in 2031? We'll still be using smartphones, and the size of them and look of them won't be very different to today. But obviously, they'll be a lot more powerful than today's devices. We may have 6G internet by then, delivered by thousands of low-orbit satellites and ground towers, giving truly global broadband at much faster speeds than today. Great for everyone, except astronomers, unfortunately. Artificial intelligence is going to take a much greater role in everything we do online, from reading and writing our messages and controlling our time schedule, both for work and social life, to driving our cars for us. We won't have totally replaced manual driving with automated cars within 10 years, but within 10 years, autonomous vehicles are going to be appearing on roads almost everywhere. We are a society that needs a lot of energy, and that's increasingly coming from renewable resources. We won't get commercial fusion for the next 10 years, but we will be very close to it by then. Perhaps there'll be 1 or 2 test reactors able to operate for hours or days at a time by this point. What's going to happen for collectors? Will we get portable XRD or other fancy tools to help us identify minerals accurately? XRD, no. Raman, possibly, but unlikely. There have been many attempts to build portable Raman machines, and not just for mineral collectors, but for very large and important clients, such as customs and border agents. And generally, the results have been poor. I'm not saying that an accurate portable Raman is as difficult to make as a fusion reactor, but I think we're going to struggle to see either of them as a reality in the next 10 years. The problem seems to be the effectiveness of a low-power laser to excite the minerals. High-power lasers are not really something you want to put in a consumer device, at least not when it's pointing out at something. Space. By 2031, we will have finally returned to the moon. I don't think we'll put a person on Mars by 2031, but it may be very soon after. The new space race has begun, but this time it's US versus China. We will have the start of a permanent base on the moon by the mid-2020s, and it should be fairly well established by 2031. Perhaps by 2031, we'll even have the first private moon tourists for travelers who can afford the costs, of course. So popping to the moon to collect some moon rocks might actually be possible for a very select few within 10 years. But if you want to find Martian rocks, you're still better off hunting for Martian meteorites here on Earth. One thing I do hope is that part of the permanent mission on the moon is to scour the surface of the moon looking for meteorites that originated on Earth. Every time the Earth was hit by large asteroid bombardments, including the one that ended the dinosaurs, large volumes of rock were ejected into space. Much of it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, forming tektites, for example, but some of it escaped and ended up on the moon. Earth rock is easy to distinguish from lunar rock because of the different chemistry and the temperature of formation. We might find samples of Earth rock formations that simply no longer exist on Earth. We might find the missing evidence for the geological conditions at the time of the birth of life of Earth, hidden on fragments of rock found on the moon. Climate change is going to become a very much more significant issue in 2031 than it is today, mostly because we've been so slow in addressing the threat. I know we want to talk about the future of mineral collecting, but we need to ensure that we are still around if we're going to talk about mineral collecting in the future. We're still not doing enough. We're only spending about 20% of what the IPCC suggests we need to spend per year in order to avert disaster. We're going to need some quite drastic societal changes if we're going to cope with this. But if anything, COVID has taught that we can adapt to rapid change. What could climate change mean for collectors, good and bad? Well, climate change is going to make large parts of northern Canada and Siberia exploitable. As the permafrost recedes, there's potential for new mineral deposits to be discovered. Don't get too excited though, because the ice ages will have removed a large portion of the most interesting secondary minerals. But gem minerals, pegmatites and the likes are likely to be found. How much of this will be found in the next 10 years is anyone's guess, but they're already looking. But the same thing will eventually happen in reverse to coastal localities. As sea levels rise, we'll lose access to many favourite spots. First to go will be those localities that currently can only be accessed on a low spring tide. Climate change is also going to impact our ability to travel. With the airline industry being one of the top worldwide polluters and no obvious replacement for fossil fuels for jet propulsion likely to be in service within the next 10 years, airlines are going to inevitably have to cover the costs of making their flights carbon neutral, which is kind of a scam, which I don't really have time to go into now, but it's at least better than nothing. By the airlines covering the costs, of course, I mean we cover the costs and increase ticket prices. There will also be great pressure on airlines to maximize seat usage on flights. So there'll be fewer flights, they'll be more expensive, and the chances of getting that empty seat next to you on a long-haul flight are very much reduced. The only positive to this is that the inefficient planes will go out of service very quickly. So fleets will be very much more modern aircraft with improved comfort and reduced noise that this usually entails. Traveling to the world to go to mineral shows, conferences, and exotic collecting trips isn't going to be as simple in 2031 as it was in 2019. We're also going to see the majority of conference events moving either partially or fully online. Let's jump again to the year 2121. Here's where we go into wild speculation. Within 100 years, we're going to be in a society that's very different to where we are today. The world will be a different place. We'll be dealing with the long-term consequences of climate change and hopefully on the road to recovery. World population will have peaked at around 11 billion in 2100, and by 2121, we'll be starting to fall as the birth rate sinks everywhere. Europe, the US, and other countries will have a rapidly aging population as medical advances and healthier life choices allow more and more people to reach 100+ years. Almost every job that can be automated will have been automated. It will be decades since anyone saw a regular human doctor outside of a university or specialist research facility. Professions that today we think would be impossible to automate will be replaced. We'll have automatic lawyers, robot firefighters, and most of our favorite new movies and TV shows will star people who have never really existed. This leads us to a huge issue. What does everyone do if there are few jobs left and there are an increasing number of elderly people who need to be supported? Three things need to happen. One of them is going to be a lot harder than the other two. The first is there needs to be a guaranteed minimum wage. Every person gets enough money every month to be able to afford to pay their rent, food, and other essential bills. There simply won't be enough real jobs going around for everyone to get one. The US won't need 500 million cybersecurity consultants. The second is that there needs to be massive reform on property ownership and property speculation. We have a growing population who needs somewhere to live. Perhaps there needs to be limits on the number of homes that any individual organisation is allowed to own, with automatic right to buy a rented property from landlords at an independently defined price. Whatever happens, there needs to be a huge shift away from the current way property is owned within the next 100 years. Finally, the traditional working week will become a thing of the past. We will hopefully have a better work-family life balance, and that will start with the 3-day work week. For those who think staying at home for 4 days a week instead of 2 is far too much, there will always be voluntary projects needing your time. In fact, it may be, if not compulsory, at least a strong obligation for everyone who can do so to do a certain amount of voluntary work per month. Energy will be cheap and non-polluting, using a combination of renewable energy and fusion power, which will by then be well established. We may even have solar arrays in space collecting solar energy to beam down to Earth. Perhaps we will have realized Tesla's dream for unlimited wireless power, which was possible 100 years ago, killed off because no one could figure a way to work out who was actually using the power and how to make them pay for it. When power becomes cheap enough, this isn't a problem. Let's get back to the rocks. So let's talk about mineral collecting in 100 years' time. First, the big question. Will people still be collecting minerals in 100 years' time? With so many other distractions and activities available, will future generations still be fascinated by minerals the same way we are? I think yes. Mineral collecting has changed a lot in the last 100 years, for example, but the reason why we collect today is no different to our ancestors. So the chances are that 3 or 4 generations down the line, our descendants will still be excited about minerals. But how many people will want to own a collection? We're already seeing a trend amongst many people to declutter their lives. And there is certainly some evidence that mental well-being is improved in people who live in clean and tidy places with few personal belongings. This is the antithesis of the collector instinct, of course, and there will always be those of us, the natural hoarders, who want to collect everything. But this may be hard in a future society where personal space for many will be even more a premium than it is now. Let's take a look at the mineral collector's home in the year 2121. You're a collector in the year 2121 and you've chosen to buy the largest property you can afford, which in this case means a basement. Full height, ultra high color display panels along 2 walls of the living room simulate a window to the real world so well that you will be fooled by it unless you're standing right next to the wall. The high intensity lighting also mimics the natural spectrum of sunlight, changing throughout the day. Today, your apartment is on an island beach. Tomorrow, you might move to an alpine valley. The specimens in your collection are generally small. Few people can collect larger than thumbnails, for the price of good quality miniature specimens and higher can be extreme. You are browsing the inventory of your favorite mineral dealer and comparing two pieces by viewing their 3D rotating holograms side by side. Even though each piece in reality is barely 2 centimeters tall, either of them will cost a good half of your monthly wage. How you wish your great-grandparents had been collecting back in the 21st century when they were so much more affordable. You decide on the dioptase and send your security code by touching a barely visible metal implant in your wrist and simply thinking your password. The neural interface links your brain directly to the integrated intelligent systems in your home, and from that, the internet, transmitting your secure order. The funds are transferred and you will receive your new mineral specimen sometime within the next 2 to 3 months. It's time to go to work. So you go change into your spacesuit and take the elevator up to the surface. Yes, the surface of Mars. Field collecting on Earth is still possible, but it's not being completely prohibited, but the opportunities are few and far between. There are still fee collecting sites. Some sites that are open for collecting today will still be doing the same business in 100 years' time, but many will be gone. But on the positive side, there may be great opportunities for robotic collecting companions to dive into abandoned mines, who you might be able to leave unattended for days or weeks at a time, digging around until they find something good for you. Now, what about collecting on the moon or Mars? Surely a fantastic bounty of rare minerals awaits a collector there. No, not really at all. I hate to say this, but the chances of a collector finding any truly exciting aesthetic minerals on the surface of the moon or Mars are almost zero. Firstly, the geological conditions are just not right. On the Earth, we have water. This is the lubricant that keeps plate tectonics moving, provides all our hydrothermal vents, our pegmatites, and in combination with atmospheric oxygen, all our fancy secondary minerals. You're not going to find wolfenite on the surface of Mars. What minerals will you find? On the moon, you're limited exclusively to igneous rocks, along with some shock-heated metamorphic rocks from impact events. Basalts and anorthosites are the 2 primary rock groups you'll find on the moon, and neither of them will excite most collectors. There are certainly some rarer minerals on the moon simply due to the different chemical composition and growth of the rocks, things like armorcolite and tranquilityite, but we're talking grains, not fabulous crystals. If I had to make a bet what the most aesthetic mineral found on the moon will be, I'll say it's possible you could find some fairly reasonable zircon crystals, and certainly some of the pyrochlore group. But something more than 2 or 3 millimeters would be absolutely exceptional. Mars has more potential. It did have running water and much richer geology than the moon, but still very limited compared to the Earth. We have already found satin, spar, and hydrite on the moon, on Mars rather. A lot of iron oxide minerals there, but again, nowhere near the level of geological complexity that has formed our rich mineral diversity. There are potentially kimberlites on Mars. Could there be Martian diamonds? Maybe, but probably not. Right, it's time to make another leap into the future. Hold on to your hats. 10,000 years in the future. Now, NASA's view of the future in the 1970s involved building space stations, rotating in order to simulate gravity for those aboard. We may have these in 10,000 years' time, but probably at a much larger scale than the one shown here. It's unlikely a viable ecosystem could be maintained in a relatively small station. Of course, by the year 12,021, things are very different to today. We will live in what's known as a post-scarcity society, which essentially means not only is everything automated, but there is such a surplus of both energy and natural resources that the cost of pretty much any physical item has reached zero. The natural resources, by the way, come from the asteroid belt and endless recycling. If you want a new pair of shoes, you simply ask for a pair and they're delivered in minutes. Your old shoes are recycled at this point, if you wish, with almost 100% efficiency. People don't abuse the system by ordering new shoes every day because people have fundamentally changed too. The way we think in 10,000 years' time will be as alien to us now as the way that cavemen would have thought about us. There won't be work as we know it now. Life will be whatever adventure you want it to be, whether it's writing historical fiction about the year 5000 or boarding ships on one-way missions to explore and colonize the stars. Many people will choose to spend their lives thinking about how to improve society, working on more efficient transport, or perhaps be part of the team planning the terraforming of Venus. There is very little private ownership in the way that we know it. Transportation, ubiquitous and free, so you don't need cars. Your home is provided for you and maintained free of charge. Well, it would have to be free of charge, because there isn't money in the way that we would know it today. Crime would be almost non-existent, as we have solved the problems of wealth inequity, and we have fully mapped out the human mind, knowing how to spot, treat, and in many cases repair the damage of mental illness. If that makes you think, whoa, we'll all be made into drones, forced to believe this space communism bullshit, then you have a very good point. There would have to be very clear protections on any brain fiddling to ensure that individually and true personality isn't lost somehow. But as I said, their society is going to be very alien to us. As for aliens, will we have found extraterrestrial life by then? I say no, at least not intelligent extraterrestrial life. We probably will have found evidence of past life in the solar system beyond Earth. We may even find unusual bacteria-like organisms on Titan or some other unexpected place. But by the year 12,021, no one has ventured out of the solar system and returned, although our probes have reached the very nearest stars and reported back no traces of life. We find out we're the first intelligent life form in the galaxy, possibly the first in the entire universe. We are special. We are also starting to change the definition of what it is to be a human. As I've said, we've mapped out the human mind completely, and that means we can recreate it, building androids that are essentially human, but instead of a fragile biological framework, they're made in a way that theoretically lasts forever. Would you choose to bring a child into the world that could only live 150 to 200 years, or would you choose a child that could live forever? Maybe the humans we sent to colonize the stars won't have any biological material in them at all. So terraforming a distant world or finding a world with a breathable atmosphere isn't a problem. You just adapt the android so that it can work well in whatever environment you find. But the brain is perfectly human in nature. It thinks, it dreams, it loves. It's just made of silicon. So where does this leave mineral collecting? Will people still collect minerals? Yes, and there will be a lot of good reasons to. Firstly, everyone has a lot of free time. So even in 10,000 years, there'll still be opportunities to go out in the field and collect. The population on Earth in 10,000 years will likely be much lower than it is today. Many will be off-well, but the fall in population is simply nothing more drastic than declining birth rate over many thousands of years. So there will be a lot more open areas available for mineral collecting in 10,000 years' time than there will be in 100 years. There are areas that we collect where even in 10,000 years, stuff will still be turning up. Think, for example, about the zeolites and various igneous formations around the world. It's going to take more than 10,000 years to go through all the rock in the Deccan traps. Of course, finding anything good is going to be a challenge. Microamounts are almost everything there is. But with the technology in 10,000 years, we could have the ability to find mineral deposits that will be impossible to detect now. Also, there'll be a whole new class of anthropogenic minerals, things that are formed through natural geological processes, through materials abandoned or altered by man. Today, some of us collect slag minerals, but in 10,000 years, there will be an amazing variety of interesting new semi-natural compounds that a collector could explore for. What about the collections that are around today? Will those specimens still exist? Maybe 20% of the specimens that are currently in collections will still exist in 10,000 years' time. But the vast majority of these will be in public museums or institutional collections. Obviously, most of the pyrites will have gone bad, but there's going to be a good chance your big quartz crystal is going to be intact in 10,000 years' time, assuming it gets passed on. When a collector dies, one of three things will happen to the specimens. One, they are passed on to other collectors, either directly or via a dealer. Two, they're thrown out as trash. Or three, they're donated to a museum. Museums are like black holes, swallowing up specimens and rarely letting anything escape. So over time, museums get more and more donations. With almost 100% free time and people able to dedicate their lives to their passions. New museums may spring up everywhere. And what we would think of as a private collection today would be very much more likely to be a dedicated local museum on museums in the on minerals in the future. And as we explore, will we find fantastic crystals like those in the image here? Maybe or maybe not. No one said the android humans had to be the same size as us. One more jump into the future. Why do we exist? What is our purpose? We build our society on the foundations laid for us by the generations that came before us. And we do this, one would hope, to be able to leave a better world for those who come after us. So what's the ultimate goal of humanity? And what will happen to all our minerals? Well, as I say, all good things have to come to an end. Assuming somehow that humanity, or what it evolves into, manages to survive through not only geological time into the future, but cosmological deep time, far beyond the death of our solar system and those that come after it. What happens next? Can we survive? If we are capable of spreading and adapting, and unfortunately, as I mentioned before, that means saying goodbye to the last of our biological heritage and evolving purely on a technological level instead, then we have a good chance of spreading across the galaxy and eventually beyond to others. But all this is fundamentally for nothing. Stars will continue to form for the next 10 to the power 14 years until the last of the hydrogen fuel in the universe is used up. The universe will go dark. Black holes will be the only thing left, and any humans left will be clustered around large black holes, surviving on the Hawking radiation being emitted as the black holes slowly shrink. We slowly drift towards the heat death of the universe, where maximum entropy applies, and life cannot exist here, not even synthetic life. After the last black hole is evaporated, somewhere between 10 to the power of 100 and 10 to the power of 106 years' time, we are left in what's called the dark era, where all that's left are slowly decaying subatomic particles. And yes, sorry, that means every mineral ever found will have been destroyed by now. There are two types of particle, those with mass and those that don't have mass. As the last of the particles with mass decays away, and only the massless particles, such as very low energy photons, remain, we reach a point where everything that exists in the universe is traveling at the speed of light. As you know from relativity, that means that time itself ceases to exist at this point. So everything we have ever done or ever will do is eventually going to decay into nothing, and not even time will be left. Maybe at this point, another universe will spontaneously create, but it will be too late for us. Thank you.